Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the State of Craft. It's been a few months here, and I've definitely missed doing this, but it feels good to be back now. We got our 37th episode, which is also the first episode of season 3. We take breaks each summer as things get quite stressful for us in the business with lots of work trips and just a lack of capacity to kind of also commit to doing this every other week. But yeah, it feels good to be back. As always, I'm going to do a little intro, a land acknowledgement, to some housekeeping items, and then I'll introduce our guests here, who are patiently waiting in the little corner there. Cool. Hey, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I am Sammy. I am the CEO and one of the founders of Certicraft. And for the first time ever, I'm wearing a Certicraft shirt in one of these things, which is pretty cool, I'd say. Yeah, Certicraft, we are a company that makes the headache of Health Canada and the CRA go away for licensed producers. We have a software system that you would use to track everything you need from seed to sale for compliance. It's very compliance focused, and we do everything on the cultivation and processing side. And yeah, I think we've grown to 150 customers now across Canada, which is super exciting considering almost all of that is word of mouth. That's all I will say about Certicraft. The rest of this conversation is not going to be about our business at all, but it's going to be about our industry. Before I get into that, though, I wanted to do a little land acknowledgement. So I live in Nelson, BC, and when I first moved to Nelson about 4 years ago, one of the first things I noticed is that I just didn't see any Indigenous folks here, and I kept asking people like, why didn't I see Indigenous folks here? And like, a year later, I met a woman who works with the local matriarch of the Snipes people in the area here, and learned from her the reason was that the majority of the Snipes in this area were slaughtered. There's a huge massacre in the area across quite a number of years. A lot of disgusting things done in the name of resources, and breaking treaties and designating them as extinct right before building dams so that they didn't have to go through the treaty processes that they had in place to get permission to do all kinds of stuff. And yeah, so I live on the unceded territories of the Snipes people here, and the Tanaha people through intermarriage as well. And there's been some pretty gross stuff done here. There went from being a population of thousands to a population of less than 10 in this area, with the Snipes people, and that's pretty gross. And there's a lot of pretty gross stories across Canada. And wherever you are, I just really hope that you take the time to learn about whatever the story is of the first people in your area. I think that's the first step to any meaningful reconciliation, is to actually understand what's taking place on the land that you're on, and to hopefully try to connect with those first people. And yeah, that's those of you who've been to the State of Craft a bunch know that those are the type of acknowledgements that I do. I really don't like the superficial, I have checked the box land acknowledgements that you typically get. So I encourage you, if you ever do an event, try not to be superficial. Don't just like check off the box, because that's like doesn't really mean anything if you're just checking off a box. Like, it's got to have some heart and soul to it. All right. With that being said, let's shift gears here. I'm gonna bring our guests back in and invite them to introduce themselves. We got Dr. Michelle Corfield here and Albert Eppinga from BC Cannabis Inc. And I'm not going to say more. I'm going to let you guys maybe each introduce yourselves and introduce your company. Oh, wait, one thing I forgot to do, housekeeping thing. For our guests, we have a chat. Please say hi. Hi, Luke. Hi, Sammy. I see both you guys already saying hi there. Cool spelling for your name, Sammy, there. And if you have any questions throughout this conversation, we have a dedicated questions tab. So go there to ask your questions, and we'll go through that for a Q&A at the end. Okay, housekeeping done. Sorry to interrupt that flow. Albert and Michelle, please take it away.
So, Chukleko Mutaski Mamuk Tsuk. So we are coming to you from Tsuk, BC, and it's the land of the Tsuk people.
Yep. Tsuk, British Columbia. That's where our facility is. We are BC Cannabis Inc. We're an Indigenous-owned company. We produce craft cannabis. We are currently working with Good Buds.
Yeah.
And they have got our products out in the stores there. And we
Is Good Buds that's
the
Pardon?
is Good Buds that Salt Spring?
yeah.
Yes.
Cool.
So
I think
they're
I've met-
plastic.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Welcome to Statecraft, guys. Glad to have you here.
Yeah.
So I think one of the questions that you asked was why we decided to not go into red market. And
Yeah, I'm curious to get into that, but maybe before we do that, would you guys like to each maybe say a thing or two about you personally, as opposed to BC Cannabis Inc., the company?
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
I'm Albert Eppinga. I'm from the Haida Nation, the Chief Wea clan. I'm a master grower at BC Cannabis Inc. and the founder of BC Cannabis Inc. This is my wife, Michelle. We just recently got married a year ago.
Oh, congrats.
Almost a year ago, on December 25th. So
Now everybody knows.
Cat's out of the bag, Michelle.
Yeah.
yeah, so we're a family-owned, operated company, and we take a lot of pride in what we do. And it's not easy. It's not an easy road by any means, but we make it work, and we cut all the fat off, make it more efficient. I mean, there's a lot to this game. I mean, it's not easy, right? And it's not getting any easier either. Like David Brown said in one of his LinkedIn posts there, he said, anybody that's in the game now that is in the game because they love what they do. They love cannabis. And that's exactly who we are. We have a massive passion for cannabis, and I've been growing weed for about 25 years. The black market, I don't call it the gray market. It was black, right? And so I got an opportunity to come. I mean, once in 100 years, an opportunity like this, because when liquor was prohibited, I mean, it took 60 years to get a micro, right? I think one of the first ones in Canada was Granville Island Brewing Company. It was 1985 or something like that. I can't remember the exact dates, but so I mean, this happened immediately once it got legal, right? I mean, so I saw an opportunity, and I'm like, I can't let this pass. I mean, what am I going to go laying in my deathbed? Like, I could have done this, right? And I didn't do it, so I had to do it, and now here we are. I got in 2021. I was Canada's top grower. We're featured on Grow and Expose season 3, episode 13.
Cool. I like that series.
Yeah, it's cool. Justin,
my friend David Robinson here in Nelson, he runs the P&W store here. He's pretty heavily involved in that.
He was just in the country from Australia, so he's filmed in Thailand, Australia. He's going all over the place now. So
cool. And Michelle, what about you? Your name in our flyer is Dr. Michelle Corfield.
No.
What are you a doctor in? I'm very curious about
I have a
your history. What brings you here?
Organizational leadership and management. So
okay.
Which coupled with my master's in conflict analysis and management. So I primarily worked in the interface between First Nations and government or organizations or corporations. And so I actually was on the College of Physicians and Surgeons when medical marijuana came into play, and sat on the committee that helped design the standards and guidelines. So I've been in the legislative part a really long time.
And the legislative part of cannabis specifically?
Yes.
What I'm hearing from that. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you were sitting in that committee, what did that mean? When you were putting those standards together, are these like standards that were adopted by government? Is it just for the College of Physicians?
No,
like what was?
No, it was Canada kind of coming together to figure it out, because this is pre-legislation. So it was a pretty important point in our history, right? It was because of a court case that the government had to go forward. And so that was the steps that they were taking. And back then we were looking at Oregon, we were looking at Colorado, we were looking at the United States to see what they had done so we could at least have an idea for Canada.
Okay, cool. I had no idea. That's pretty cool. I'm glad I asked more specifically about that. Is there anything else other than the doctor part of your name that you feel called to share in this moment here before we get into it, Michelle?
Well, I did co-design the only Indigenous MBA at SFU in the world.
What does that mean to be an Indigenous MBA at SFU?
It means it's taking because working in First Nations communities, and I'm going to talk about it later, is there's the legislative frameworks that First Nations operate under with the federal government, which are not the province. So you have all of these different components. So when someone comes and takes an MBA, they learn about all of the policies, such as the Indian Act, that impact and the different opportunities that exist because you're working with First Nations.
Cool. I could already tell I'm going to be learning so much in this conversation, and that excites me so much, guys. I'm stoked to have you both as our first guests of season 3 here for the State of Craft. Well, yeah, Albert, like you were saying, we were chatting, for those of you who are joining us now, before we went on air, and I was mentioning how before we get into like the heart of this discussion, I really wanted to at least briefly touch on why the two of you guys have chosen to enter the legal market in this world instead of the red market. Since it seems like most people who are Indigenous have chosen to follow whatever regulations their nations have created and operate within each of the various frameworks that exist, rather than taking part in the Canadian federal framework. So what led to you guys choosing to get licensed as a micro instead of going into the red market?
Well, like I said, I grew weed in the black market for about 25 years. So, you're always hiding, you're always doing things, you're trying to make sure no one sees anything, out of sight, out of mind. And, it was just a lot of, I thought this would be an easier route going the legal way, right? And so that's what I decided to do. And also I wanted to make sure that our people have a good role model for doing things the right way, right? Not doing things, with gangs, and our people, our children, they have a lot of issues with drugs and alcohol and gang, and, violence and all that type of stuff. So I wanted to set an example and do things the legal way, and that's what I did. And it's a once in a lifetime chance you get. At the time, it was like once in a lifetime. Man, it's going legal. Like, why? It's the phoenix rising from the ashes, right? Like, so that's why we mainly decided to go legal.
Cool. And how? Hell no. I can answer that question for you. So what would you say? Like now you're like 4 or 5 years in? When did you get your license?
Well, now 2021, April 9th.
Okay.
2021.
So when did you start
the process? I started building out. Well, I got picked to be at this park. There was 250 people that sent their cannabis samples in, and I got number 1 and number 2, so that they picked me to be in the park, right? The micro park. So we're actually changing gears now a little bit. We're going to be doing our own facilities on our own property shortly. It just makes more sense, right?
Yeah.
And so we're pretty excited about that. We're also going to be doing a lot more other things, but we'll touch base with that a little later. Maybe we'll do another podcast and talk about that.
Tell them about 2018.
Oh, 2018, when I founded BC Cannabis?
Yeah, and how hard it was to find.
Yeah, so I was in my clipping room. Like, we're clipping at one of my places, and I was like, well, it's legal now. Like, what? I got to call this company something, right? I'm going to go get a name search done, and what's the new word now? It's like cannabis. It used to be marijuana, pot. So I was like, where are we? We're in BC, right? We grow the best weed. So I was like, okay, I'm going to call it BC Cannabis. So I go down to the to get a name search done. Came back, a chicken scratch, like to sell, market cannabis, how to write all that stuff. Have you ever done a name search? That's what you got to write. And so I did that, and I'm like, there's no freaking way I'm going to get this. Like, and it came back approved. And I'm like, what the hell? This is meant to be. And all of a sudden another letter came back that I had to do the protocol with British Columbia to use BC in a name. So that was a whole other application process. So I did that again, chicken scratch. And that came back approved. And I was like, this is unbelievable. Like, I don't like the name. I mean, BC is known all over the world, right? So, and I'm proud to be BC Cannabis because we are BC Cannabis. I'm from BC. I'm from the Haida Gwaii, and we grow the best weed around, right? So, I mean, everybody grows good weed, but everybody does.
Yeah.
Everybody now
BC Bud is world renowned for a reason. Everywhere around the world who's into cannabis knows about BC Bud and wants to experience BC Bud. So no, you're onto something there.
And so that's what happened. Then I'm like, okay, well, I got a company name now. I'm like, now I got to find freaking zoning. I'm like, at that time, zoning was absolutely impossible to get, like, anywhere for cannabis. So I had I'm like trying to. So that's a long story, but then that's how we ended up in Soup.
Tell them about going to all the nations. That's
I'm also So in the meantime, once I knew I couldn't, trying to find zoning, so I wanted to work with Indigenous communities. So I went and presented at a few bands in British Columbia, and a lot of times when I go in there at the time, cannabis was considered a gateway drug, right? That's some of the old elders thought, and in reality, it's far from that, right? So
it gets people off harder substances. It's the opposite. It's like exit drug.
It helps with so many different things, as you can tell a little bit. But so it was quite a story. And we went to, a lot of them said no. We went to Squamish Nation. We went to Chehalis. We went to Stolo Nation, and all the same thing, right? Gateway drug. I'm like, but you have liquor stores on your reserve. That's causing far more damage than weed would, right? So, and then they ended up having some illicit stores on their or grows on their reserves, and the SWAT would come in and raid them, right? So it didn't show a good example for the youth, right? Because they were run by gang bangers or whatever, and they were growing in the reserve. And that didn't. So they had a bad reputation. Cannabis had a bad reputation. Cannabis had a terrible reputation in the illicit market, right? And then, and so I have a good story actually about they had a store. I'm not going to name the nation, but they had a store, Indigenous Bloom, it was called. I don't think they're around anymore though, but they might be. I don't know. But they had a store, and it got raided twice by the RCMP. And the chief said he wrote a letter to the prime minister or the premier. He said, if you raid my store one more time, I'm going to take a backhoe and rip the tracks, the railroad tracks that bring billions of dollars worth of merchandise through. It goes right through his reserve. I'm going to rip it out of the ground. He never came and raided that store again. I mean, that's a true story too. And so, with all that said, it's in that report that comes out. This being the what we heard report now. Whatever.
Yeah. Oh no, it's cool. I just want to make sure I'm following when you say with the report that came out that you're talking about the what we heard report.
You still haven't landed in Souk yet.
Oh, yeah. I'm just rambling on.
He still was looking.
Michelle, I love how you're like, no, tell this part of the story. No, that part of the story.
Oh yeah. So in 2018, I came out, and then I also met another. That's where I met Good Buds. So it was, Tyler Rumi and his brother Alex and their father Eric. They're just great people, a family-run business, and I signed an LOI with them to do the same. And what happened with the LOI? I deviated from there and then went and did my own facility instead, right? And then what happened? Now we came full circle, 2023, 5 years later, and now we're working together again. And they're just a great group of people. There's, they mean the world to us. So, and now that's what we're doing. So,
yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate getting to hear about the origin story, so to speak, of how BC Cannabis Inc. Was formed slowly through all kinds of twists and turns. And I'm sure there's so much more to the story that we're not, getting into here right now. But it's nice to have a glimpse of it. So yeah, let's shift gear. You brought up the what we heard report there briefly. I think that's the report you were talking about, Michelle. For our audience, me and Albert and Michelle all got on a phone call a couple weeks ago, and I had just met the two of them in Victoria at the Grow Up conference down there, and right away hit it off and invited invited them on the spot to kind of be part of this podcast, and then they're quite interested. And when we talked on the phone, Michelle was talking about the What We Heard report that had just come out, and she was very frustrated with it. And she was like, "Yeah, if we can pick whatever we want to talk about, which that's the whole point of this thing, our guests get to like discuss what they want to talk about. This is what I want to talk about, because like I'm just not down with what's being shared here." So once that kind of became the topic of conversation, we decided to just kick off this Datacraft right away so that this conversation can happen around that report.
Oh no.
It might come back. Just give it a sec. Maybe. That's interesting. I don't know what happened. Well, I don't know if anybody can hear me, but I think we have a froze event right now here. So maybe write on there and let them know.
Oh, he can hear it. Oh, well,
you can hear us?
We can keep talking then.
Well, we'll just keep talking.
Sorry about that big pause. So everybody knows. Okay, good. Maybe he'll come back. This is his show. So like I said, I was involved in the College of Physicians and Surgeons when we were bringing medical marijuana to the Canadian market, so to speak, in the sense that it was being adopted and legislated that it could happen, which meant recreational was going to come. So in 2018, you had the legislation for the ability to have recreational cannabis. In that sense, knowing the government said they would review it within 5 years. What happened is they wrote this What We Heard report, and I don't think they actually ever wanted to touch the legislation. And we all know that we need to change the legislation in order to make this cannabis industry thrive. So when I read the discussion questions that were being asked, I said, they will never get to anywhere because these questions aren't meant to actually answer anything. So it was really disheartening to see the report in the sense that it could have done so much to help us because we've struggled. This has not been easy. And I don't think it's been easy for anybody. So what I thought was going to happen in this What We Heard report was there's going to be all these good recommendations and we're going to change legislation. We're going to make things easier and we're going to do all these wonderful things. We're doing nothing. The government's doing nothing and less than nothing. They do care about minors and they care about them so much that they keep supporting the illegal market because everybody knows 50% is illegal, 50% is legal. So we're fighting against people that have no testing, no rules, no regs, and they're putting their stuff out on the market, selling it cheaper than we can get it up into the market. Why? Excise tax, government controls everything on the tax side. So who loses? The growers.
So I got a question for you, Michelle, and thank you for jumping in when my internet went down here for a moment there. If that happens again, I trust it'll be in good hands, seeing as how I came back to you just steering the ship anyway. From my understanding, and you know, just to be clear, I have not read the report. I have not had the capacity recently to take the time. I was really hoping to be able to at least skim through it before this conversation, but I haven't. So I'm fully reliant on you guys here. From my understanding, the report's goal wasn't to make recommendations, but just to kind of reflect what they heard so far. From what you read, were any of the reflections things that like felt valid, or even in that it just like didn't even like hit the mark on like what was like did they talk about like, you know, everybody struggling because of like overtaxation?
No, not really.
What? I know they heard that. So why the hell aren't they saying that?
They did hear it. They heard it before. They heard it before they actually got the legislation through. A lot of the things that you will see in the report are things that they knew about prior to the legislation being built. So the report doesn't go to the place and space that we need it to go. You hear it's actually in the Indigenous section that actually everything seems to be revealed.
Yeah, I think it's like 50% of the reports are based on Indigenous stakeholders and licenses, right? It's very interesting that if you heard about sugarcane or whatever, right? When they had that store that they put there.
That's Williams Lake Nation First
Nations?
Nations?
Yeah, Williams Lake First Nations. And now they have an edible store there that's not licensed, but they still have COAs for it. So it's like, because they passed that Supreme Court ruling that they can, First Nations people on their traditional territory can have stores there and they're not going to get raided. So when I was talking about getting raided before, those stores that were on the reserve in 2017, 18, that can't happen now.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't even happen in the first place back then. But the thing is, we're trying to do things the right way and trying to protect the youth. And, but I mean, look at the illicit market. Where is all the youth getting all their products from? Not from us. They're getting it from the illicit market, which is not regulated. There's a lot of ways they could, deal with that too. But I haven't really. I think it was like 5% every year they're trying to get away from the market.
Yeah. And
the illicit market, but I don't see any of that happening. It's actually getting bigger and stronger now, the illicit market.
I mean, the thing that I find really perplexing is there's something that Dan Sutton always shared, which is that to fix everything on the taxation side, only one word needs to change, and that's in the greater of 10% or $1 per grant, make it the lesser of. That on its own would allow everybody to no longer be overtaxed. It would become like a reasonable taxation when we're talking about 10%, no matter what. And on top of that, that's what would make the illicit market go away. Because the reason, I can't speak for all of Canada, but in the Kootenays where I live, the vast majority of the growers here, they were planning to get licensed day one. Yeah. They haven't because of all the bullshit that exists. That's why they haven't. It's way too hard. They look at what they have to do. They look at the money they have to spend on it. They look at the taxation reality, and they're like, I'm going to have to spend $500,000, $1 million, and I don't know that I'll ever break even. So who looks at that and says, yeah, let's do it? Nobody.
Small licenses, a micro or a small facility, they're still getting charged $1 excise tax, and like a publicly traded company. I mean, we don't, we're not publicly traded. We're just putting our own hard sweat, tears, and our own money into this thing. It's not like we're using other people's money. It's so I don't agree with that, but I totally agree with Dan Sutton's and his perspective on things. That guy is a wonderful guy, and I wish the best for him, and he supported us as well. So I mean, he's a great guy, and he's super smart. And he knows what he's talking about. So,
yeah, it's like I always use this example, and I'll share it again because I think it can't be shared enough. But here in the Kootenays, there were about 3,000 underground operators. Of those 3,000, 2,500 had gotten some form of medical license, and of those 2,500, 2,000 were planning to get licensed on day one. Until the regulations came out and they saw what was involved. Since then, I think it's about 12 to 15, somewhere in that range, that have gotten licensed in the area around me. Let's just call it 20. Let's round up to 20. 20 out of 2,000 is that's. Yeah. I think that's 1%, isn't it? Yeah, that's 1%. And of those, the vast majority have either shut down their business already, or they've revoked their license, or they're planning to, or they've paused for a season because it is that impossible. So I think that's the only statistic that we really need. And the fact that the government has heard that statistic from me many times in many levels of government, many ministries in BC, many federal ministries as well, up to the highest level, have heard me share the statistic. What else do you need? That tells the story in and of itself. When 2,000 wanted to, 20 did, and most of them have closed operations. That's enough said.
yeah, for sure.
Well, and you see all the public companies as well, right? They came in a gold rush mentality, raised all this money, they've spent their money now, and they're going.
Yeah, they blinded the eyes of the shareholders, right? I mean, you can't. We, micros and the 25 years that we grow, we built this industry. We built it. You can't reinvent an industry that's been here for over 50 years, right?
Yeah.
Like if you think about it, like they try to grow giant 300,000 square foot facilities and grow shitty weed, try to sell it, put it on the market, and it didn't work. And and now you can see the percentage of micros now is 60% now out of the licenses are micros, and the 40 is a process LPs or whatever, right? So that was in the report as well.
Interesting.
It's kind of interesting.
I did not know that.
Going back to where it was, really.
I knew that, like,
we always want to get our weed too, right? So
I knew that it was the micro space was the only space that was like really continuing to grow, and it was like the larger you are, the more likely you were shrinking. That like largest echelon is where the most compression and shutdown of facilities has happened. So I knew that part, but I didn't realize that had happened to the point that micro is now outweighed standards by number of licenses anyway, by volume moved. And I think micro still might be like less than 1% of the entire market.
Right. Weed, that's the percent of the good best weed. The micro.
Yes,
right?
Of course. Of course.
The Angus Footman. So he was, I guess, I don't know if he's listed or not. He's one of the co-founders of Canopy Growth. And he quoted, I asked to use his quote one time from him because he told me, he's like, Albert, he's like, we can't grow the tomatoes, but we could make the ketchup, is what he said, right? So it's a good example of how it all turned out there.
Yeah.
So he's doing some other stuff now, but yeah, it's interesting.
So I want to, Earl Oliver, he's been a guest here before. He said something in the chat there. Freeland has stated openly that tax reform isn't a priority. Earl, who is Freeland? I don't know that name.
Oh, she's the deputy prime minister.
Deputy Prime Minister of Canada as a whole, or
yeah.
And she has what's the relationship between? I don't know too much about Canadian. I'm from Palestine originally. I've became a Canadian citizen maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, so I don't know too much about Canadian politics yet. Like what is the role of the Deputy Prime Minister?
Well, they are like second in command, but she was also the finance minister previous to her Deputy Prime Minister role. And
she's publicly stated that tax reform isn't a priority. That's fucked. That's so fucked.
Was it tax reform for cannabis, or was that for just everything? Because everything needs to be.
What did they make last year?
I imagine
2.8 billion.
Yeah, they made
or $3.
The government made, I think it was a $2.8 billion, and the GDP went up 43 billion or something like that. They had put onto the GDP. Yeah. So that was in the report as well, which is interesting, right? At least someone's making money. I mean,
yeah.
It isn't the crafts.
No, it's not. Man, that's really disheartening to realize that like somebody that high up within the decision-making powers that be within Canada has openly stated something like that. And I imagine, Albert, that if she stated something like that specifically about cannabis, Earl, can you like clarify one way or another, and maybe like share a link if you have anything?
Well, I actually, the report was I was advised on the report as well. This is when they started doing that report. It was like 2021 or something like that, 22, and now it's finished. But like the number one thing I said was like the excise tax for Indigenous communities. I mean, that should go back to the communities. Is what I think. And allow them, like when I presented to some of these communities, they didn't even have enough gas to put in a school bus to take the kid to school. I mean, these are somewhere you can put a facility up in the middle of nowhere and create some revenue and then take the tax back, give it back to the people, right? Yeah. I think that's an important gesture the government could do with reconciliation. It'd be nice, right? But I highly doubt that. They need to get more money, $2.3 billion, and maybe next year even more.
I agree, Earl.
Or Earl said, how about just drop the fucking excise tax all around? That's what Michelle's agreeing to, for those of you who are watching on YouTube and can't see the chat.
That drives the cost up, right? So on a 7-gram bag, you're paying $7 in excise tax alone, plus your PST and your GST.
Plus the markup that the distribution boards do is done over the tax as well. So they're marking up the tax, not just your product as well. So there's that little little thing in there too.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then see the craft on the other end of that. It's not always nice.
No.
Right? In these times, it's really tight margins.
The only thing that keeps me going myself is I have a passion, right? I love doing what I do, and I'll do anything to make it work, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we're looking at international markets now. There was actually about 1,200 shipments that were, or applications for, I think it was David Brown's news article. He had like 12, I think it was roughly about 1,200 companies trying to applications, right, for it. So, sure. I mean, if they're expecting it to increase also over the next little while, because there's no money in Canada really, right? So,
and if you export, there's no excise tax.
So Michelle, I've got a question for you to bring it back to the report here. From my understanding, this 3-year review that began like 4.5 years into legalization. My understanding is that they have until the spring of this coming year, 2024, to kind of make the actual recommendations that they're going to make. And this is kind of like a part way. Hey, this is what we've heard so far. Now we're going to like work on making recommendations based off what we heard. Like, do you feel like there's any likelihood that they'll actually make any kind of meaningful recommendations come spring 2024?
No. Because in order to change any legislation, you have to consult. You got to consult the people. You got to consult First Nations. You got to write it. Then you got to put it up for 60 days for people to comment. I forget how many times you do that. Then you get it to the government, where the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister are with the other MPs, and try and get it passed there. Then you got to send it to the Senate.
Well, that was interesting. It was written in the report. There's very little communication with Indigenous communities about cannabis.
So then because you were saying how like half of the report was about Indigenous communities.
Admitting that, right? I mean, because when I went to present at these communities, they have to get a Cannabis Act in their own communities to be able to have stores and facilities for their people, right? So it's a process as well on the Indigenous side in the communities. And so,
Albert, there's something I'm not following. You said just now that, and maybe I misunderstood you, that they didn't talk too much to the Indigenous communities. Did I understand you correctly?
That's what they say in the report. You read the report. There is a lot of stuff about First Nations and Indigenous people.
And in the report, it says we didn't talk too much to Indigenous communities.
Yeah. So
why do they have so much on Indigenous communities if they didn't talk to?
But it is in that section. It's in that section that you will find some of the things that we, as a, regular craft. I don't know. Yeah. We're not
as a licensed micro.
Yeah, we're just a regular licensed micro. There's nothing special about us because we're Indians, and we're still Indians because that's what our status card says. So but like we've got problems, right? We've got people. We can't get bank loans.
Yeah, can't even get a credit card.
Canada is responsible for setting the standards for our national banks. That should have been talked about in a great detail because we're forced to borrow money at a larger interest rate. Mm-hmm. We are not able to get money at a regular commercial rate. That's keeping the illicit market going.
So Michelle, I want to dive into something else that you said earlier. You talked about how in this Indigenous section of the What We Heard report that had a lot written in there, you said that's kind of where I forget what you said exactly, but something to the effect that that's where like the truth came out or something like that. Like, do you remember what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, I do, because I think
Okay.
he was the one that said it. So when I read
Okay.
his report, I'm like, these are all the things that we complain about.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, can you speak to that? What are the things that they said in there that you felt like actually had some substance to them?
Well, we're tied to sell to a licensed processor.
Yeah.
In that tying us to that, we have no security that we're ever going to get paid. And you don't get paid you get paid from the government right away, but they have the ability to come back and take the money out of your account until it's sold through. So there's a lot of withholding, I would say. So the grower still doesn't get paid.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's even been horror story. We've had a horror story shared before in a previous podcast episode where somebody had sold stuff through to a processor. That processor had stole their stuff for them, but a different lot that they had sent that had nothing to do with the cultivator had returned to vendor from the distribution board. So they were just like, sorry, you're not getting paid because we're out of money. And so there's stuff like that as well, where like, even though they make money off your stuff, you're still not seeing that money. And that's been a thing.
Oh, it's because the government can go into their bank accounts and they go in and take it.
Which is understandable in a sense, but I mean,
but there's no protection for us.
There's no protection.
Yeah.
I mean, the old saying is like, you get paid when we
I didn't know that part, that the government, I thought that was just them choosing to withhold and not pay. I didn't realize that the government could go in and actually take the money, and then if you don't have funds, then you're just shit out of luck. I did not know that, so I appreciate you helping me understand that piece of the puzzle.
It flows through. But
so the crafts are the most vulnerable, and they have the least amount of protection.
And they're the foundation of the industry at the same time. Most vulnerable, and without that, like, what is the cannabis industry?
So you have to have some sort of faith or trust in these processors. You're looking at two people that lost over $500,000 to a processor. And that processor sold all our product and was paid. And
they never paid us. So we had to go to the Supreme Court, and we won. But we still can't get paid from them. So we won to a Supreme Court lawsuit for $500,000 to get our money back from these guys. But I mean, this is just one example. I could name, I know my other buddies in Quebec work with those same group, and that same thing happened to them too. So they just went around robbing people, like literally knowing that that's what they're going to do. Right.
Are you able to name who they were? I feel like some public shaming is in order here.
That's detrimental to a small company like ours, right? So we had
He said, "Can you name it?"
Name
Radiant Technologies. I don't care. We won the lawsuit.
Radiant Technologies.
Yeah.
Screw you guys for being horrible humans. This is terrible. This is an industry where people.
Yeah, they did it to a number of people. Like my Stefan McDonald, my buddy Stefan, whatever you're listening to, that people like just a fucking joke. Right? I mean, it was, in the old days at the black market, you just mount up, right? No one got robbed then. Nothing like this happened. I never was robbed in the black market like that.
It's really interesting.
I get regulated, think it's safe, and all of a sudden, I get taken for the most I've ever got taken for in my life, right? Like, I mean, it's ridiculous.
And
there's this interesting thing.
And I want to point it back to that's part of the legislative problem we have, right? Because the crafts have to sell to these people, but there's no bond or anything at the processing level to ensure that the craft will get paid.
Yeah, that's a perfect example right there.
One thing I find like really fascinating, which is like what you guys are talking about right now here, and this is something that I think a lot of government folks have a really hard time wrapping their heads around. Yes. In the illicit market, all relationships were based off trust. Nobody had contracts because why would you, in paper, create evidence for something you're doing that's illegal? Yes. And so it was all trust-based. It was all community-based. And anybody who ever abused that trust, like word spread quickly. They were like not to be trusted. They were out. They had no more chances. That's it. You got one strike. You're out.
All you got is your word and your balls, right? Or your hand. That's it. I mean, I'm, that's all. I still abide by that. Even now, I mean, your reputation is everything in this industry.
Yeah.
So,
And so a lot of these people who come from the illicit world where it's all about trust and reputation, where you were never taken advantage of, everybody was always at their word. Really scummy, disgusting people now who have corporate backgrounds where it's the opposite of that. It's all about how can I take advantage of people? How can I trick people? How can I deceive people? Not everywhere in the corporate world. There's definitely good corporations out there, but there's a lot of disgusting stuff in the corporate
well,
world
the
too.
interesting thing is that they're actually a publicly traded company,
Yeah.
right, at one point. So
Totally. I'm not, yeah. And I think a lot of the publicly traded companies are like the worst out there. Just look at like, I don't know, the kind of shit that like big oil or big pharma does. Like, it's disgusting.
Also, big farmers why cannabis was illegal for so long.
Part of it, not just that. I mean, also the nylon industry, the paper industry, racism was a huge part of that too. There's a lot of reasons, but yeah, big pharma was a huge part of that too, of course. Yeah, we had an interesting discussion with what's his name, John Conroy. I think it was our fourth episode that we did, where he gave like a little like 5-10 minute lecture partway through on the history of cannabis becoming illegal in Canada. And in BC, it was a lot to do with racism towards Chinese people. As like Chinese people were brought in to build the railroads across the Rockies. It's like horribly dangerous job that white people didn't want to do, and so many Chinese people lost their lives building the railroads across the Rockies to connect BC to the rest of Canada. And then as soon as that was done, they didn't want the Chinese people to stay, so they all used cannabis and opium as part of their culture, and so they made those things illegal so that they could deport all those people. And that was the genesis of cannabis becoming illegal in BC specifically. But every place across North America has got a different like reason, but it's always rooted either in racism or in some corporate interest that is scared of hemp. It's not about the cannabis, it's about the hemp and the fibers there. And more often than not, it's a combination of both the corporate interests and the racist side. I found it fascinating to the point of the big pharma that like the American Doctors Association had a huge petition going when cannabis was starting to become illegal to be like, no, we need this. This is a medicine that we use, that we prescribe. So on the physician level, the whole stigma that exists around cannabis today is new. That was not here 100 years ago. It was a common medicine back then. So
my brother Peter, Dr. Peter Eppinga, he's a medical doctor, and he said his books he studied in school never said a single word about mushrooms or cannabis in them because they were written by pharmaceutical companies, right? So they don't want the people to know about cannabis.
Something you can grow that we can't control that actually helps and like alleviates so many symptoms, and not only that, addresses root causes, which our drugs don't do, but we wouldn't want that.
Take those opioids.
Get addicted to our things, and the side effect that it causes, we got this other thing for that side effect.
Our elders and one of our relations is he had to take Oxycontin, I guess it's called, and it just ruined his life. And then we gave him some CBD and some tinctures, and he totally changed his life. Like he's like normal, back to normal again. Like our people don't like taking these drugs, right? We have traditional medicines that we use. That was written in the report. Also, cannabis is one of the mushrooms, we're off subject a little bit from cannabis, but in my culture, in the Haida Nation, we had shaman and we had longhouses. And these longhouses, we'd have dances. When we go to war, we come back, and then sometimes some were missing and some were there. So post-traumatic stress, right? The family, but we believed in reincarnation. So, but we still, when you're missing somebody, you're sad. Or when you went to war, you have these thoughts in your mind, like police officers or whatever. And so the shaman knew that these mushrooms did something to help our people. And so he'd make a bowl of soup and then pass the soup around the whole longhouse. And everybody, imagine that, fire's going, regalia's on, they're dancing. And then you're on mushrooms. That'd be a trip and a half, right? But I mean, also it helped the people. It helped our people. It helped our people heal. And we didn't abuse it. We only used it when the shaman gave it to us after certain events and stuff. That's from the Haida Nation. That's where I'm from.
In a ceremonial context,
Yes.
is a very different experience.
It's used all over the world in indigenous communities,
Totally.
mushroom. So
And
it's
even
nothing new, right?
and even without kind of that ceremonial container, like all the research that's being done at universities nowadays around the use of psychedelics and just the amount of healing that it brings to people in a more clinical context
Yeah.
is incredible. Like this is just the number of people who go from being scared shitless for the end of their life to like after one usage of mushrooms being like, oh, okay, death isn't that scary,
That's
and
a
just
perfect
calm
example.
down.
Yeah.
Because the pharmaceutical, like my brother said, that none of that was written in his pharmaceutical books. But what you said there, because they have to continually take a pill from the pharmaceutical companies for the rest of their lives to help heal their issue, when really all they have to do is one big dose of mushrooms and it's all gone, right? So they wouldn't have a business then, right?
So that's another area.
Sorry, I'm just getting off way off.
Dr. Michelle says, put the clamps on that, Albert.
And what we heard is there's not enough money being put towards research for cannabis or CBD or anything. So we need to make sure that the government funds or somebody's funding research in this area because A, it does need to be in our pharmacies. People do need to have access to it all the time. This shouldn't be this.
Doctors handing out licenses to grow weed at your house. And that's the other issue.
Yeah.
Right?
Who needs 1,500 plants? Please tell me. Who needs 1,500 plants to have their medical marijuana?
If you're juicing leaves every day, would you? How many plants would you say you need for that?
We have 1,250 plants per room. We grow 100 to 150 pounds. So for an individual to have 1,500 plants and smoke 150 pounds of weed, I mean, so that's the issue there.
Let me ask you a question because I know
into the illicit market, right?
I got a question for you guys because I know a lot of like cancer patients. They use cannabis leaves and they juice it, and they'll have like 100 leaves a day that they juice into something, and they drink that, and that's how they use the cannabis medicine.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to harvest 100 leaves every day and juice that, how many plants would you need for that to be self-sustaining?
What do you say? 100?
How many leaves?
No, how many plants would you need to have 100 leaves a day and have that be self-sustaining?
Maybe
10 plants would be enough for that.
Something like that, maybe less, 7. But
so there's enough. So with 10 plants, I'm assuming a mature veg plant here, with 10 plants, if you harvested 100 leaves across all those 10 plants every day, it would replenish.
Yeah.
Cool.
So what I'm getting at is like, where I came from, right? I came from the black market. I know what's going on in the industry, in the illicit market, is these licenses that are out there. A lot of them are using them for good, but the majority is organized crime, and they're using it to fund the illicit market on the internet, on their websites that they have to be able to sell products. And they look totally legit websites too, if you ever see them. And
do you think those are all organized crime though? Because I know the Department of Justice Canada did a pretty significant survey into it, and they found that most of the people in the illicit market weren't involved with organized crime. That it was a very small minority actually. So I'm curious about.
Well, everybody I know that has websites, they're organized crime. So I don't, I come from Michigan. I'm not saying that this is an issue, but it is a way to help stop the illicit market a little bit by actually going. They don't go to. We got so many mandates on us, like as a legal cannabis facility, and they have nothing. I mean, they should be going. The CRA should be going to these places and counting the plants.
Yeah.
When they crop out, how much weight is there? Because what they're supposed to do is destroy what they're not using, right? But none of that gets destroyed. It gets put into the black illicit.
I'm just not into that approach because it uses so many resources. And if they just change the taxation regulations with that one word from the greater of 10% or $1 to the lesser of 10% or $1, then that's kind of it. This industry becomes accessible, and there's no more barrier to entry on a financial level. And at that point, I think it becomes near impossible for the illicit market to keep competing because we're like, it's the taxation that makes it impossible to compete.
Oh, it's a lot more than that, but yeah, that's definitely part of it for sure.
I don't know.
But
CRA comes into our facility and counts plants.
Yeah. So what else do you think there is, Albert? Because to me, like, it's pretty clear that the taxation is the single biggest thing. That if I agree, there's a lot of other obstacles to getting licensed, a lot of other obstacles to like getting into the market. But assuming that you have your shit together, you grow good weed, that's not an issue. There is demand for your product. The thing that stifles people is the taxation. It's overtaxed, and if we look at we had an episode of the Brishna from Earthwolf Farms and extraction company, and they were saying that when they do their live rosin, they do like hash and rosin, the excise charged to them, the excise is larger. The excise on its own is larger than the entire cost of an equivalent product in the illicit market. So how the fuck are they going to compete with that when the excise alone is more expensive than what their competitors in the illicit market are paying? So that's where I kind of like talk about why I think like excise reform and making it actually reasonable would stop this reality.
Yeah, I mean, if we, micros on average do between 400 and 600 kilos a year. So I mean, you're looking at the tax on that. I mean, it's 600. It's a huge amount of money, like $600,000, right? So that's what we're dealing with too, on top of everything else, price drops, regulations, and stuff like that. I mean, they got to loosen it up a little bit. You're right, Sammy. The tax has to, that 10% definitely. What was his name again?
Who? Oh. Dan.
Yeah. Dan Sutton said.
Shout out, Dan. I hope you're doing well after all the stuff that happened with Tantalus over the summer. I hope you're feeling all right despite all that. Definitely appreciate all the work that you've done, and hope you're doing okay. Guys, we're approaching the end of time here. I don't see any questions in the questions tab there. If any of our audience have any questions, go ask them now. Last chance for questions. Michelle and Albert, any final thoughts related to the What We Heard report that you want to share?
Well, it's not going to change legislation. That's the sad part, right? We do need some legislative changes, and it's not going to happen as a result of this report. So it's a little.
And you don't think there's any chance that in the next 6 months that can change with whatever they put out at the very end?
No, because you'd have to already be out on consultation.
But haven't they? Because like I know, like they came through. They reached out to me and asked me to organize a thing in Nelson. Like I know that they met with 9 different producers in the area. I was in that room. I met with them too, and they definitely heard about the challenges and how 8 of the 9 people in the room were either shutting down or had shut down. And I actually didn't know this. I didn't like hand select people in order to like tell a particular story. I just invited the micros that I knew were more eloquent and a couple standards. It wasn't just micros, it was 2 standards, 7 micros. And it was just the people who I knew could speak to government and in a respectful manner, despite the traumatizing experience that they've been having for years. And it turned out that 8 of those 9 people had either shut down operations or were planning to. So I know with certainty that they definitely heard that side of the story, and that there's been consistent consultations throughout, because that was one of many, many, many different consultations that they've done. So even with that, you're saying that's not enough to like get the
no, because they have to come out and consult on the changes.
Even if it's just recommendations, because I don't. This is where you know a lot more about this world than I do, because I'm totally ignorant to like how this.
It's not going to happen.
Okay.
How about this?
That's disappointing. That's super disappointing, Michelle.
Well, we'll try and talk to the Prime Minister. I don't know. I don't see it.
Luke asked a question: what brands, products of yours should we be keeping an eye on in the store?
Wait for that. We'll get to that. We'll get to that at the end here. thanks, Luke, for asking that. But that was already planned. Luke didn't need your help to give them a shout out for their stuff. I've got one last question, Michelle. That'll be like the last question I got for you guys, and it's really me just wanting to understand like how we actually change things. So let's just make it simple. It's just this excise reform thing to get that one word changed from greater than to lesser of, greater of to lesser of. What actually has to happen? Like, do you understand like the process of what actually has to happen to make that change? Because I don't know that I do.
Well, you have to get a group of people to come together to agree, hire a lobbyist, and lobby government. That's how it gets done.
And what is lobbying? What does lobbying government mean? What's the actual steps that are happening in that?
Well, you get a whole bunch of political people that are not elected that understand all of the different avenues of government and how to maneuver in the system, because it's a beast unto itself. So that's like a whole lecture series.
Okay. So essentially pay somebody who really understands the machine to go and like poke in the right spots.
Yeah.
And in your opinion, that's the only way to actually make that kind of a difference.
Yeah, I just don't think we're organized enough, and I don't think our voices are coming across strong enough on the things that we do need changed. I think we need to get organized. We need to put together a good set of recommendations for change and get that in front of the right people. Miss Freeland, Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Economic Development Minister.
Yeah.
But
okay, guys. Well,
it's done.
Yeah.
Well, on this not so depressing note around the lack of things changing, I want to thank you for being here on the first episode back to the State of Craft. I've learned a lot of new things actually in this conversation, so I appreciate that. Before I introduce what our next episode is going to be, which I'm actually really excited about, we'll ask you the question that Luke asked here, which is BC Cannabis Inc. What do you guys got coming down the pipeline that you're excited about?
Well, that is the brand.
Legacy Craft, BC Cannabis Inc. Legacy Craft.
That's the brand, and we're in over 100 stores right now, and we have coming down. We have going to drop in about 2 weeks.
We have Korean barbecue.
Going to drop in 2 weeks.
There's a limited time offer.
Does it taste like a Korean barbecue?
And we have Real Grape. Just dropped. We have Chem de la Chem and Golden Haze.
Chem is a tissue culture.
Yeah, Chem's a tissue culture from Segra, the group Segra. Matt, if you're thinking, watch it. Hey. Golden Haze and
no, that's done.
Blueberry Sweet Gas.
They're done. They're sold.
Oh, they're already sold out. Oh.
They're sold.
So the big one.
Just the first half of what they said.
But
I love Korean barbecue.
Gumdrop's coming out in probably Purple Gumdrop's going to come out in probably late November, and then we will have Death Bubba.
Yeah, we're going to do the real Death Bubba, old school, the original. So that's going to be a nice one. They call it Death Bubba because it puts you in a death sleep. It's a good sleeper. Like I want to do right now after this stuff.
Yeah. Cool,
All
guys.
right.
Well, thank you so much for being here. For those of you that are watching, for next episode, we have Ted Smith from the Victoria Cannabis Buyers Club, the last remaining compassion club in Canada, currently being fined for $6.5 million by the BC government, despite the city of Victoria wanting the VCBC to continue. We're gonna have a conversation around why, despite legalization, why does Ted feel that it's really important to keep having this compassion club? He, along with, I think it's with Kirk Tusa, are counter-suing, or rather, they're just suing the BC government for all of the way they're being treated. We're going to have a big discussion around that and just figure out the reasoning behind this. So I'm really excited for that, because Ted's a cool guy who has literally transformed so many people's lives, has helped so many people heal, has gotten so many people off the streets, and so many people off like really harmful hard drugs. And I don't know, that's that's an angel in human's clothing as far as I'm concerned. So it's a little disappointing to see the BC government is treating them in this way. Yeah, we'll see from Ted. Gets to learn his story and see what that's all about. So that'll be episode 38 of the State of Craft. Michelle, Albert, thank you guys again for being here.
Thanks.
If you guys are curious about what we do at Certicraft, please reach out. We'd love to have a conversation. Bye, everybody.